Clara Bennett rose from her chair before the laughter could finish dying down. She did not cry. She did not flee. She smoothed her skirts, lifted her chin, and curtsied to the man who had just called her unworthy of love in front of 40 guests. Then she turned for the door. She never reached it, because Captain Samuel Hawthorne stood first, crossed the silent room, and opened it for her himself. If you love stories where quiet women win, hit subscribe, stay till the very end, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from tonight. The candles in the Grayson dining room burned low and gold, and every eye in the room had turned to Clara Bennett. "Plain enough to manage a household," Edward Grayson said, lifting his glass as though offering a toast, "but not beautiful enough to deserve love. Isn't that so, Miss Bennett?" The laughter came in a wave rolling down the long table from the Pemberton sisters to old Colonel Whitfield, who chuckled into his wine before he caught himself. Aunt Beatrice did not laugh. She smiled instead, the small, satisfied smile of a woman watching a plan come together exactly as she had arranged it. Clara did not answer right away. She set down her fork. She folded her hands in her lap. And for one long moment, she simply looked at Edward Grayson, the way a person looks at a debt they intend to collect someday. "I suppose that depends," she said finally, "on what a man believes he deserves." A few guests exchanged glances. Edward's smile faltered just slightly before he recovered it. "Careful, Miss Bennett. A woman in your position ought to mind her tongue." "My position," Clara repeated. She rose from her chair slow and deliberate, her spine straight as a rifle barrel. "You mean the position of a guest at your table, Mr. Grayson? Or the position of a woman you intend to marry for land you no longer own?" The room went still. Somewhere near the fireplace, a woman gasped behind her fan. Edward's jaw tightened. "That is not—" "I did not ask you to finish," Clara said. "I asked a question. You need not answer it here. Everyone in this room already knows the truth of it." She turned from him. She did not look at Aunt Beatrice, though she felt her aunt's eyes on her like two hot coals. She walked toward the door, her chin high, her hand steady, though her heart beat so hard she could feel it in her throat. She did not make it 3 steps before a chair scraped back. Captain Samuel Hawthorne stood. He had said almost nothing all evening. He rarely did. He was a man the county respected the way men respect a loaded gun left on a mantel carefully and from a distance. He had fought in the war. He had buried men with his own hands. He owned more land than anyone at that table save perhaps Edward's late father, and he spoke to almost no one about any of it. He crossed the room without a word, his boots even, and unhurried against the floorboards, and he reached the door before Clara did. He opened it. He held it. He did not smile, did not bow, did not offer her his arm. He only said quiet enough that only she could hear it, "After you, ma'am." Clara looked at him. Something in her chest, something that had been clenched tight since the moment Edward opened his mouth, loosened just slightly. "Thank you, Captain," she said. "Wasn't for you," he said. "Was for the room. Somebody needed reminding what manners look like." She almost smiled. Almost. She walked through the door he held, and he closed it behind them both, leaving 40 stunned guests and 1 furious host behind the wood. Outside, the summer night was warm and thick with the smell of tobacco fields. Clara stood on the porch steps and let out a breath she felt she had been holding since supper began. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "No," Samuel agreed. "Didn't have to." "Then why did you—" He was quiet a moment, looking out at the dark line of trees beyond the drive. "Man says a thing like that to a woman in front of 40 people, somebody ought to answer it. Nobody else was fixing to. Aunt Beatrice certainly wasn't." "No," Samuel said. She looked rather pleased, as I recall. Clara's hands tightened at her sides. "She arranged this evening. She arranged the seating. She very likely arranged what Mr. Grayson intended to say." "You believe that?" "I know it," Clara said. "My aunt has never done a single thing in her life without a purpose behind it. And her purpose, Captain, is Edward Grayson's hand in mine before my 25th birthday." Samuel turned to look at her fully then, and Clara felt the weight of his attention, the way she might feel a hand pressed flat against her back, steadying, not unwelcome, but unfamiliar. "Why?" he asked. "Would your aunt want you married off to a man drowning in debt?" Clara opened her mouth to answer and then closed it again. She had asked herself the same question 100 times in the dark of her room, turning it over like a stone she could not quite lift to see what lay beneath it. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I intend to find out." Chug. She did not sleep that night. She sat at her window instead, watching the moon slide behind the tobacco barns, and she thought of her father. Thomas Bennett had died when she was 17, quietly in his sleep. The doctor had said, though even then something in Clara had rebelled against the simplicity of that explanation. He had left her as far as anyone knew, with nothing but debts, and a house that belonged technically to her mother's sister. Aunt Beatrice had taken her in, with the air of a woman performing a great and burdensome charity. She reminded Clara of it often, the cost of her keep, the expense of her gowns, the patience required to house a girl with no fortune and no particular beauty to recommend her. Clara had believed it. For 7 years she had believed every word of it. She was no longer certain she believed it now. Martha found her in the kitchen before dawn, kneading bread dough with more force than the task required. "You'll pound that dough into paste, child," Martha said, setting down her basket of eggs. "Perhaps I want paste." Martha studied her a long moment, the same look she had given Clara since she was a girl of 10, half amusement, half worry. "Last night's supper's still sitting poorly with you, I take it. Edward Grayson called me unlovable in front of half the county, Martha, and my aunt sat there smiling as though he'd paid me a compliment." Martha's hands stilled over the eggs. Something passed across her weathered face, quick, careful, gone, almost before Clara caught it. "What?" Clara said. "What is it?" "Nothing, child." "Martha." Clara set down the dough and turned fully to face her. "I have known you my whole life. I know precisely what your face does when you are keeping something from me." "What is it?" Martha glanced toward the kitchen door, toward the hallway beyond it, where Aunt Beatrice's rooms lay still and silent this early in the morning. "Your father," Martha said quietly, "did not die a poor man, Miss Clara." Clara felt the floor shift beneath her, though she had not moved at all. "What did you say?" "I said what I said." Martha's voice dropped lower still. "I was in this house the night he passed. I heard things I was never meant to hear. Your father had money, child. Land. More than your aunt ever let you believe. I don't know where it went or how it came to be that you were left with nothing while she inherited everything he owned. But I know what I know." "Why?" Clara said, her voice shaking now. "Why did you never tell me this?" "Because I was afraid," Martha said simply. "Because your aunt made it plain the week after your father died what would happen to an old woman with nowhere else to go if she spoke out of turn in this house." Clara sat down slowly at the kitchen table, her legs no longer entirely steady beneath her. "There is more," Martha said. "There is a chest, beneath the old cellar behind the wine racks. Your mother asked me before she passed to keep watch over it. She made me promise. I have kept that promise 7 years, Miss Clara, waiting for the day you were strong enough to open it." "Why now?" Martha's eyes were wet, though her voice stayed steady. "Because I watched a man call you unlovable in front of half of Virginia last night, and I watched your aunt smile as he said it. And I have decided I am done being afraid of Beatrice Holloway." Clara did not sleep the second night either. She lay awake listening to the house settle around her, to the creak of old wood and the distant call of some night bird in the tobacco fields. And she thought of chests and letters, and a father who had perhaps not been what she believed. She thought, too, of Captain Samuel Hawthorne standing in a doorway offering her nothing but 4 words, and the simple, unshakable fact of his presence. "Wasn't for you, was for the room." She did not entirely believe that. Not anymore. 2 days later, Edward Grayson came to call. He arrived with flowers, which Clara found almost insulting in its predictability, and an apology so smooth it must have been rehearsed in front of a mirror. "I spoke poorly," he said, standing in the parlor with his hat in his hands, doing his best impression of a chastened man. "The wine, Miss Bennett. I am not myself when I've had too much of it." "You seemed entirely yourself, Mr. Grayson." "Clara." "Miss Bennett," she corrected. His jaw tightened the same way it had at supper 2 nights before, and for just a moment, Clara saw something beneath the polished apology. Something colder, more calculating, more desperate. "I would like," he said carefully, "to call on you again. Properly. With your aunt's blessing." "And why?" Clara said. "Would I permit that, after what you said to me?" "Because," Edward said, and here his voice dropped, lost some of its rehearsed smoothness, became something closer to honest, "because your aunt has made it very clear what will happen to your position in this house if you refuse me." Clara went very still. "Is that a threat, Mr. Grayson?" "It's a fact," he said. "One I'd rather you heard from me than learned some crueler way." He left shortly after, flowers still in his hand, forgotten on the hall table. Clara stood alone in the parlor for a long while after the door closed behind him, turning his words over, feeling the shape of the trap closing slowly around her. That night, she went to the cellar. Martha came with a lantern and a key that had clearly not been used in years. Its teeth rusted its weight strange and cold in Clara's palm. Together they moved the old wine racks, coughing at the dust that rose from years of neglect, and there set deep into the stone foundation was a chest bound in iron. Clara knelt before it, running her fingers over the lock. "The key doesn't fit," she said, after a long moment, twisting it uselessly in the mechanism. "This isn't the right key." Martha's face fell. "Your mother told me this key would open it. She was certain." "Then either she was wrong," Clara said, "or there is another key somewhere in this house we have not yet found." She sat back on her heels, staring at the chest, at the promise locked inside it, and felt something new rising in her chest beneath the fear, something sharper, steadier. Not sorrow, not any longer. Resolve. "I will find it," Clara said quietly. "Whatever is in this chest, Martha, I will find the key that opens it. My father did not leave me nothing. I do not believe that any longer. And I do not intend to marry Edward Grayson to save myself from a lie my aunt has been telling for 7 years. Martha reached out and took her hand, her grip surprisingly strong for a woman of 63 years. "Your mother would be proud of you, child." "My mother," Clara said, "would tell me to bow to no one who has not earned my respect." Outside, far off across the tobacco fields, a horse's hoofbeats sounded faint against the dirt road. Steady, unhurried, moving toward the house rather than away from it. Clara did not yet know it was Samuel Hawthorne coming to call at so late an hour, nor what he carried folded in his coat pocket. A letter from an attorney in Richmond, the ink still fresh. The words inside it enough to unravel everything Aunt Beatrice had spent 7 years building. She only knew, kneeling there before a locked chest in the dark of her father's cellar, that the woman who had curtsied and walked calmly from that dinner table 2 nights before was gone. In her place knelt a woman who intended to fight. Samuel Hawthorne did not knock. He stood at the edge of the porch, light hat in hand, and waited until Martha noticed him through the kitchen window before he said a word. Clara came up from the cellar with dust on her skirts and the useless key still clutched in her fist, and when she saw him standing there in the dark, something in her chest tightened before he had spoken a single syllable. "It's late, Captain. I know it," he said. "Wouldn't have come if it weren't important." "What is it?" He reached into his coat and drew out a folded letter, the paper crisped, the seal already broken. "Got this from an attorney in Richmond, man by the name of Jonathan Pierce. Handled some land business for me 2 years back, honest as they come. I wrote him after supper the other night, asked him to look into your father's estate records." Clara's breath caught. "You did what?" "Didn't think it was my place to sit idle after what I saw at that table," Samuel said. "Figured a man who calls himself decent ought to do more than open a door." She took the letter from him with hands that were not quite steady. Martha came up behind her, holding the lantern higher, and together they read it by its weak flickering light. "Captain Hawthorne. Records pertaining to the Bennett estate show irregularities. I cannot explain through ordinary error. The probate filing lists Thomas Bennett as deceased with debts exceeding assets, yet county tax records from the same year show him as the largest landholder in his township outside the Grayson family. I would advise caution in how this inquiry proceeds. Send word if you wish me to continue." Clara read it twice before she trusted herself to speak. "He was not poor," she said. "Martha, do you understand what this means? My father was not poor. Someone made him poor. On paper. After he was already dead and could not argue otherwise." "Your aunt," Martha said quietly. "My aunt," Clara agreed, "who has fed me, clothed me, and reminded me every week of my life for 7 years how much of a burden I am to her generosity. My aunt who inherited everything he supposedly did not have." Samuel's jaw was tight. "You want me to write him back? Tell him to keep digging." "Yes," Clara said without a second's hesitation. "Tell him to dig until there's nothing left to find." "There's a risk in that," Samuel said. "Your aunt's got friends in this county. Magistrate Coleman owes her husband's estate a favor or two from years back if what I hear is true. She finds out you're asking questions, she won't sit still and let you ask them." "Then I won't let her find out," Clara said. "Not yet." She barely slept that night, and when she came down for breakfast the next morning, she wore the calm, composed face she had spent 7 years perfecting under her aunt's roof. The face that gave nothing away, that betrayed no hunger, no anger, no grief. Aunt Beatrice was already at the table, pouring her tea with the unhurried precision of a woman who had never once doubted her place in the world. "You look tired, Clara." "I did not sleep well. I imagine not after the spectacle you made of yourself at the Graysons' table." Beatrice did not look up from her tea. "Humiliating Edward in front of the entire county. Do you have any notion what you've cost yourself?" "I did not humiliate him, Aunt. I answered a question he asked me." "You embarrassed a man who was until that evening prepared to offer you marriage." Clara set down her fork with deliberate care. "Forgive me. I was under the impression Mr. Grayson called me unlovable in front of 40 witnesses. I must have misheard the proposal buried somewhere inside the insult." Beatrice's eyes lifted, then sharp and cold. "Do not test my patience, girl. You have precious little standing in this house as it is. So you remind me, weakly, because it is true, you have no fortune, no prospects, no family beyond what charity I extend to you. A woman in your position cannot afford pride, Clara. Edward Grayson is willing to overlook your temper and your plainness provided you learn to hold your tongue. That is more than most men would offer you." Clara felt the old familiar sting of those words. Plainness, charity, position, and for 7 years she had let them land and settle into her like stones, sinking into still water. But this morning, with Jonathan Pierce's letter folded into the lining of her sleeve, the stones did not sink the same way. "Perhaps," Clara said carefully, "I have decided to reconsider Mr. Grayson's offer after all." Beatrice's teacup paused halfway to her lips. "Have you? I have thought on it," Clara said, keeping her voice smooth, empty of anything her aunt might read as deception. "You are right, Aunt. I have no fortune of my own. Perhaps it is foolish to refuse a man simply because he wounded my pride at supper. Men say cruel things. Perhaps I ought to forgive it." For a long moment Beatrice studied her, and Clara made herself hold that gaze without flinching, without blinking, without giving away the lie sitting beneath her calm expression, like a knife beneath a folded napkin. "Well," Beatrice said, finally, satisfaction creeping into her voice. "I am glad to see you have found some sense at last. I shall write to Edward this morning. He will be pleased." "I am certain he will be," Clara said. She excused herself from the table a few minutes later, and only once she had climbed the stairs and closed her bedroom door behind her did she allow her hands to shake. Edward called again 3 days later, this time without flowers, without apology, wearing instead the satisfied smile of a man who believed he had already won. "Your aunt tells me you've reconsidered," he said, settling into the parlor chair across from her as though he owned it. "I have. I confess I'm surprised. You seemed rather set against me at supper." "I was angry," Clara said. "Anger passes." "Does it?" Edward studied her, and Clara made herself meet his eyes, made herself hold perfectly still under his scrutiny, the way she might hold still before a snake, waiting to see which way it would strike. "I'll admit, Miss Bennet, I expected more of a fight from you." "Would you have preferred one?" "No," Edward said. "I find compliant women considerably less trouble." Clara smiled thinly. "How fortunate for you, then, that I intend to be so very little trouble." He left an hour later, pleased with himself, and Clara stood at the parlor window watching his carriage roll down the drive until it disappeared past the tobacco fields. Martha appeared at her shoulder, wringing a dish towel between her hands. "You're playing a dangerous game, child." "I am playing the only game available to me," Clara said. "If Aunt Beatrice believes I have surrendered, she will grow careless. Careless people make mistakes. Mistakes leave evidence. And if she does not grow careless, if she simply marries you off before the truth comes out—" Clara's jaw tightened. "Then I will need to move faster than she does." That night, she returned to the cellar. She had thought of little else for 3 days. The chest, the wrong key. Her mother's promise made to Martha years before her death. She sat on the cold stone floor with the lantern beside her and turned the chest over in her mind, the way she might turn over a puzzle box, searching for the seam she had not yet found. "Martha," she said when the housekeeper joined her, "you said my mother gave you a key. Are you certain it was meant for this chest?" "That's what she told me, child. On her deathbed, near enough. She was not entirely herself those last days. The fever had her mind wandering." "Then perhaps she was wrong. Perhaps the key was meant for something else. A drawer, a cabinet, a different lock entirely." Martha's face went still thoughtful, and then slowly, carefully, something shifted behind her eyes. "There was a writing desk," she said. "In your mother's old sitting room, before your aunt had it cleared out and turned into a sewing room. A rosewood desk with little drawers along the top. Your mother kept her letters in it." "Is it still in the house?" "I believe your aunt moved it to the attic years back. Said it was old-fashioned. Never had the heart to sell it, though, not that piece. It had been your grandmother's before it was your mother's." Clara was on her feet before Martha finished speaking. "Show me." The attic was thick with dust and the smell of old cedar, and it took the better part of an hour working by lantern light with Martha's guidance before they found the rosewood desk, pushed into a far corner beneath a moth-eaten quilt. Clara knelt before it, her heart hammering, and fit the small brass key into the lock of the center drawer. It turned. The drawer slid open with a soft protesting creak, and inside, Clara found a stack of letters, bound in faded ribbon, and beneath them, a folded document sealed with wax that had long since cracked and crumbled. "Martha," Clara whispered. "Martha, look." She unfolded the document with trembling hands, and Martha held the lantern close so they could both read it. "Last Will and Testament of Thomas Alden Bennett." Clara's breath left her in a rush. She read further, her eyes racing across the faded ink, and the words she found there struck her like a blow to the chest. "To my beloved daughter, Clara Elizabeth Bennett, I bequeath the whole of my estate, including all lands, holdings, and moneys, to be held in trust, until she reaches the age of 25 years or upon her marriage. Whichever comes first, under the guardianship of my trusted friend and attorney, should my sister-in-law prove unfit to serve in that capacity. He left everything to me," Clara said, her voice breaking. "Everything, Martha, the land, the money, all of it. There is no mention of Aunt Beatrice inheriting anything at all." "Then the will your aunt showed the court 7 years ago? Was not this will?" Clara finished. "It was a different document entirely. A forgery." She sat back on her heels. The true will clutched to her chest, and for a moment, she could not breathe past the fury and grief tangled together in her throat. 7 years. 7 years of being told she was a burden, a charity case, a girl with nothing to offer any man but her plainness and her obedience, and all of it built on a lie her own aunt had constructed over her father's grave. "There's more," Martha said, lifting the stack of letters. "Read these, child." Clara untied the ribbon with unsteady fingers and opened the topmost letter. It was in her mother's hand, dated only weeks before her death. "My dearest Martha." If you are reading this, then I have not lived long enough to tell Clara myself, and I trust you to see this into her hands when she is ready to hear it. I fear for my husband. I fear what my sister is capable of, and I fear I will not live to protect our daughter from her. If anything should happen to either of us that seems unnatural, I beg you do not let it rest. Thomas suspected poison in his tea for weeks before he grew too weak to act on his suspicion. I did not believe him until I began to feel the same sickness myself. Clara's hands went cold. Poison, she whispered. Martha, she's saying someone poisoned them, both of them. Martha's face had gone pale as the moon. Beatrice. We don't know that for certain. Who else stood to gain child? Who else inherited everything your father left behind while you were told there was nothing? Clara sat frozen, the letter trembling in her hands, the weight of 7 years of grief and confusion suddenly reshaping itself into something far darker and more deliberate than she had ever allowed herself to imagine. I need to speak with Captain Hawthorne, she said finally. Tonight. Samuel arrived within the hour, summoned by a note Martha's grandson carried across the fields at a dead run. He read the will in silence, and then the letter, his face growing harder with every line. This changes everything, he said when he finished. This isn't just fraud anymore, Miss Bennet. If your mother's suspicions were true, this is murder. I know it, Clara said. You understand what it means to accuse a woman like your aunt of murder. She has standing in this county, friends, money, even if it was never rightfully hers. An accusation like this without ironclad proof could destroy you rather than her. Then we find ironclad proof, Clara said. You said Mr. Pierce found irregularities in the estate filing. Perhaps he can find more. Records of purchase, apothecary accounts, something that ties her directly to it. Samuel studied her for a long moment, something like admiration flickering behind his usual guarded calm. You're not afraid. I am terrified, Clara said honestly. But I am done being afraid quietly. If my aunt murdered my parents to steal what belonged to me, I intend to see her hang for it, Captain, and I do not much care how frightened I am while I do it. Something shifted in Samuel's expression. Then, not quite a smile, but close enough to it that Clara felt the ghost of warmth pass between them, despite the horror of the night. I'll write Pierce first thing, he said. Tell him what we've found. Ask him to look into apothecary records, anyone who might have sold arsenic or the like to this household in the months before your father died. Thank you, Samuel. It was the first time she had used his given name. He noticed. She saw it in the small, almost imperceptible pause before he answered. Don't thank me yet, he said. We've a long way to go before this is finished. The next several days passed in careful, deliberate performance. Clara smiled at her aunt over breakfast. She accepted Edward's calls with practiced patience, let him talk at length about his plans for their eventual marriage, the renovations he intended for his crumbling estate. Once her supposed dowry non-existent, she now knew, though he did not help settle his debts. You've grown quieter, Edward observed during one such visit, studying her with something sharper than his usual self-satisfaction. More agreeable. I confess I find it somewhat unsettling. I did not realize agreeableness was a fault, Mr. Grayson. It isn't. It's simply unlike you. He leaned forward slightly. I begin to wonder, Miss Bennet, whether you are entirely as reconciled to this arrangement as you'd have me believe. Clara felt her pulse quicken, but she kept her face perfectly still. What would you have me do? Mr. Grayson weep rage. I have done both already, the night you insulted me before half the county. I find I have no further appetite for either. He studied her a moment longer, and then apparently satisfied sat back. No, I suppose you haven't. But Clara noticed after he left that his carriage did not turn toward his own estate. It turned instead toward the Holloway side gate, where Aunt Beatrice's private study looked out over the garden. She found Martha in the kitchen and told her what she'd seen. They're meeting, Martha said grimly. More than they let on. I need to hear what they're saying. Clara, if you're caught, I won't be caught, Clara said, already moving toward the hall. I know this house better than either of them. I grew up in it. The garden path beneath her aunt's study window was overgrown with roses that had not been properly tended in years, and Clara pressed herself into the shadow of the trellis, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it might give her away before a single word did. The window above her stood open a few inches to let in the evening air, and through the gap voices drifted down low and urgent. Cannot wait until her birthday, Edward was saying. Every week that passes, my creditors grow less patient. I need this marriage settled within the month, Beatrice, not some vague future date you keep promising me. You will have it settled when I say it is settled, Beatrice's voice replied, cold and controlled. Rush this and the girl will grow suspicious. She is not stupid, whatever else she may be. She's already suspicious. Did you not see her at supper? Standing there, unafraid, throwing my own words back at me in front of the entire county. That is not the behavior of a frightened, compliant girl. She is frightened, Beatrice said. She simply hides it well. Her mother was the same. There was a pause, and then Edward's voice again, lower, more careful. Her mother. Beatrice, I have wondered. Do not wonder, Beatrice cut in sharply. Whatever happened in this house 7 years ago is no concern of yours. Your concern is marrying the girl and settling your debts with what comes to you once the marriage is complete. Nothing more. And if she refuses at the altar, if she finds some way to delay past her birthday, she will not refuse, Beatrice said, and there was something in her voice now that made the hair on Clara's arms rise. I did not spend 7 years building this arrangement to have it undone by one stubborn girl's cold feet. If gentle persuasion fails, I have other means of ensuring her cooperation. What means? That, Beatrice said, is not your concern either, Edward. Simply be ready when I tell you to be ready. Clara pressed her back against the cold brick wall beneath the window, her breath coming fast and shallow, her whole body trembling with a fury so complete it nearly buckled her knees. She had heard enough, more than enough. Her aunt had all but confirmed what the letter in the rosewood desk had only suggested, that this marriage was not merely convenient, but essential to some larger design, one built entirely on Clara's silence and cooperation. Other means of ensuring her cooperation. The words followed her back across the garden and into the house, cold as a blade pressed against her spine. She told Samuel everything 3 nights later, when he came again under cover of darkness, this time with news of his own. Pierce found something, he said before she had even finished recounting the conversation she'd overheard. An apothecary ledger from a shop 2 counties over. Purchase recorded 8 years back, arsenic sold in a quantity far beyond what any household needs for rat poison. Buyer's name recorded as B. Holloway. Clara felt the floor tilt beneath her. That's not proof of murder, Samuel said carefully, watching her face. Arsenic's used for plenty of legitimate purposes. A defense attorney could argue it away easy enough. But combined with the forged will, the falsified estate records, your mother's letter. It's a pattern, Clara said. A pattern only a fool or a very confident murderer would leave behind. She never expected anyone to look, Samuel said. 7 years nobody questioned her. Why would she think anyone ever would? Clara sat with that thought a long moment, turning it over. Because I was supposed to marry Edward and vanish into obscurity as his wife. A woman with no fortune, no standing, easily controlled, easily silenced. That was always the design, wasn't it? Not simply to steal what belonged to me. To ensure I never had the standing or the freedom to ask questions about how she came to have it. Looks that way, Samuel agreed grimly. Then we need more, Clara said, standing pacing the length of the parlor with restless, furious energy. The will alone isn't enough. The ledger alone isn't enough. We need something that ties it all together so completely that not even Magistrate Coleman, however indebted he is to her husband's memory, can look away from it. Pierce is still digging, Samuel said. He thinks there may be more documents. Whoever forged that estate filing had to have help, a clerk, a witness, someone willing to falsify a signature. That person may still be findable. may still be willing to talk, especially if it means saving their own neck from a charge of forgery. Find them, Clara said. Whatever it costs, whatever it takes. I want this finished before my birthday, Samuel. I will not stand at an altar beside Edward Grayson while my aunt watches with that same satisfied smile she wore the night he humiliated me. I don't intend to let that happen, Samuel said quietly, and something in the plain, unadorned certainty of his voice settled something in Clara's chest that had been shaking loose for days. Why do you care so much, Captain? You barely knew me before that supper. You owe me nothing. Samuel was quiet a long moment, his eyes fixed somewhere beyond her on some memory or thought he did not immediately share. Lost my sister when I was young, he said finally. Not to sickness. To a man our own father trusted with her hand, a man who turned out to want her fortune more than her heart. And when she tried to refuse the match, once she learned what he truly was, our father would not hear it. Told her a woman's feelings mattered less than a family's obligations. His jaw tightened. She married him anyway. Died within 3 years of a grief nobody in this county would name honestly. Clara's breath caught. Samuel. I was 14, he said. Too young to do anything but watch. I swore watching her that if I ever again saw a woman cornered the way she was cornered, I would not simply watch. He looked at her then, steady and plain. That's why I stood up at that supper, Miss Bennet. Wasn't only manners. Was that? Clara did not know what to say to that. She only reached out without entirely deciding to, and pressed her hand briefly against his arm. Thank you, she said quietly, for not simply watching. He looked down at her hand and something passed across his face that he did not name, and neither did she, though the moment sat between them a beat longer than either had intended. The days that followed moved with a strange, dangerous rhythm. Clara playing the part of the resigned, compliant bride-to-be by daylight and by night, gathering every scrap of evidence Samuel and Jonathan Pierce could uncover. Pierce's letters arrived every few days now, each one adding another thread to the web tightening around Beatrice Holloway. A clerk in the county recorder's office, dismissed under mysterious circumstances the same year Thomas Bennet died, was located in a neighboring town, working as a bookkeeper under an assumed name. Pierce traveled to speak with him personally, and what the man revealed once convinced his own neck was not at risk, if he cooperated, confirmed everything Clara had feared. Mrs. Holloway paid me handsomely to alter the recorded will and destroy the original filing. The clerk's sworn statement read once Pierce sent it along. I did not know at the time what use she intended to make of it, only that she was insistent it be done quickly within days of her brother-in-law's death, before any other family could review the estate. Clara read the statement twice, sitting at her window in the dead of night, and felt something cold and clear settle over her. Not grief any longer, not even fury, but a kind of quiet, focused resolve that frightened her a little with how steady it felt. We have enough, she told Samuel when he came the following evening. The will, the letter, the ledger, the clerk's statement. Surely that is enough for Magistrate Coleman to act. Maybe, Samuel said carefully. Or maybe your aunt has more influence with him than a stack of paper can overcome easily. Pierce thinks we ought to build the case further before we bring it before the court. One weak link, one piece she can discredit, and the whole thing could collapse, and once she knows we're coming for her, she won't sit still and wait to be caught. Clara's stomach tightened. You think she suspects already? I think... Samuel said your aunt did not survive 7 years of this deception by being careless. And Edward mentioned your birthday's approaching faster than she'd like. If she feels cornered, there's no telling what she'll do to protect what she's built. He was right to worry. 2 nights later, Clara woke to the sound of her bedroom door easing open in the dark, and she lay frozen, feigning sleep, as a shape moved quietly across her room toward her writing desk. She heard the soft rustle of papers being searched, the careful, patient movements of someone who had done this before, and knew precisely how to avoid waking a sleeping girl. She did not move until the shape withdrew and the door clicked softly shut again. Only then did she rise, her heart hammering, and check the drawer where she had, with great foresight, kept nothing of consequence. The true will, and the letters were hidden elsewhere in a hollow beneath a loose floorboard. Beneath her bed, a precaution Martha had insisted upon days before. Someone had searched her room, Someone had been looking for exactly the evidence she and Samuel were building. She did not need to guess who. She confronted Martha the next morning in the privacy of the kitchen, her voice low and urgent. "Someone was in my room last night, Martha, searching my desk." Martha's face went ashen. "Your aunt?" "I don't know. I didn't see clearly. But who else would have reason? Edward, perhaps?" Martha said slowly. "If she's told him to look for proof you're plotting against them." Clara's blood ran cold. "She suspects me. She's suspected you since the night you agreed so easily to marry Edward after the humiliation he dealt you. A woman like Beatrice does not trust sudden compliance, child. She knows you too well for that." Clara sat down heavily at the kitchen table, her mind racing. "Then we haven't much time left. If she believes I'm hiding something, she'll move against me before I can move against her. What do you intend to do?" Clara was quiet a long moment, staring at her own hands folded on the table before her, hands that had once trembled through an entire dinner of public humiliation, and now, somehow, did not tremble at all. "I intend to leave this house," she said finally, "before she finds a way to trap me in it permanently." She wrote to Samuel that same afternoon, a short, urgent note carried by Martha's grandson across the fields, and he came within the hour, his face grave when she told him what had happened. "You can't stay here," he agreed immediately. "Not another night, not if she's already searching your room." "Where would I go? I have no family beyond my aunt. No fortune of my own, not yet, not until the will is proven in court." Samuel was quiet a moment, and then he said, "My sister, my late sister's widowed sister-in-law, Rebecca Whitmore. She keeps a house 2 counties east near the river. Quiet woman, keeps to herself, owes me a debt of gratitude from some years back. I never asked her to repay. She'd take you in, ask no questions, and Beatrice would have the devil's own time finding you there. You would send me away alone." "I'd send you somewhere safe," Samuel corrected. "Somewhere your aunt can't reach you while Pierce finishes building the case. It won't be forever, Clara. Only until we've enough to bring this before the court properly, without risk of her destroying evidence or worse." Clara looked at him, at the steady, unwavering certainty in his face, and felt something in her chest ease despite the fear still coursing through her. "You called me Clara," she said softly. Samuel seemed almost surprised by his own slip, a faint color rising along his jaw. "My apologies, Miss Bennet." "Don't apologize," Clara said. "I find I rather liked hearing it." He held her gaze a moment longer than strictly necessary, and something unspoken passed between them. Not quite a promise, not quite a confession, but the quiet, fragile beginning of something neither of them had words for yet. "We leave tonight," he said, finally clearing his throat, "before your aunt has cause to look for you in your bed and find it empty by accident rather than design." The journey east was made in near total silence under cover of darkness. Clara wrapped in a borrowed cloak, with her father's true will and her mother's letters sewn carefully into the lining of her traveling bag. Martha had wept when she said goodbye, pressing a small bundle of coin into Clara's hand. Savings, she admitted, that she had kept hidden for years against exactly such a need. "You'll write to me," Martha said, gripping Clara's hands tightly. "The moment you're settled. I need to know you're safe, child." "I will," Clara promised. "And Martha, thank you for everything, for 7 years of kindness in a house that offered me precious little of it." "Go on now," Martha said, her voice thick, "before your aunt wakes and finds this whole business unraveling before her eyes." Samuel drove the carriage himself, refusing any hired driver who might later be questioned or worse bribed into revealing where Clara had gone. They rode through the night, the tobacco fields giving way slowly to unfamiliar country, and Clara sat beside him in the dark, watching the world she had always known disappear behind them. "Are you frightened?" Samuel asked, somewhere past midnight, breaking the long silence between them. "Terrified," Clara admitted, "but less frightened than I was sitting at that dinner table, pretending my aunt's cruelty didn't wound me. At least now I am moving toward something, rather than simply enduring." Samuel was quiet a moment. For what it's worth, Miss Bennet Clara, I don't think there was ever anything plain about you. Edward Grayson is a fool and not simply for his debts. Clara felt warmth rise in her cheeks, despite the cold night air, despite everything. That is a very improper thing to say to an unmarried woman in the dark of night, Captain. Reckon it is, Samuel agreed, and for the first time since she had known him, Clara heard something that might almost have been a smile in his voice. Didn't say I regretted saying it. They arrived at Rebecca Whitmore's house just before dawn, the sky beginning to pale at the edges, and Rebecca herself, a tall, plain-spoken woman with kind eyes, and no evident curiosity about the circumstances that had brought Clara to her door in the middle of the night, welcomed her inside without hesitation. Samuel Hawthorne's word is good enough for me, Rebecca said simply when Clara tried haltingly to explain. You're safe here, Miss Bennet. Whatever you're running from, it won't follow you through this door. Clara wanted desperately to believe that. But even as she lay down at last in an unfamiliar bed, exhaustion finally overtaking the fear that had driven her through the long night, she could not shake the memory of her aunt's voice drifting down through that study window. I have other means of ensuring her cooperation. She did not yet know what those means might be. She only knew, drifting at last toward an uneasy sleep, that Beatrice Holloway would not simply let her disappear without a fight, and that whatever came next, it would arrive faster and crueler than either Clara or Samuel had yet allowed themselves to imagine. Rebecca Whitmore's house sat quiet under a gray morning sky, when Clara woke disoriented for one long moment before memory came rushing back: the supper, the letter, the chest, the flight through darkness. She lay still, listening to the unfamiliar creak of an unfamiliar house, and felt the full weight of what she had done settle over her like a heavy quilt. She had run. For 7 years she had endured her aunt's cruelty in silence, and now in the space of a single week she had uncovered a murder, fled her home in the dead of night, and placed her trust entirely in the hands of a man she had known only a handful of days. Rebecca knocked softly and entered with a tray of tea and bread. You slept past noon, she said, not unkindly. I imagine you needed it. I'm sorry to impose on you like this, Mrs. Whitmore. I know nothing of your circumstances, and yet you've taken me in without a single question. Samuel Hawthorne doesn't ask favors lightly, Rebecca said, setting the tray down. And he doesn't send frightened young women fleeing across 2 counties in the dead of night without good reason. I don't need to know the particulars to know you need a safe roof over your head, Miss Bennet. Clara accepted the tea gratefully, her hands still not entirely steady. May I ask how you know him? Something soft crossed Rebecca's face. He was married to my husband's sister briefly before the war took her too. Fever, not the fighting. He grieved her proper, stayed close to our family long after most men would have moved on and forgotten. When my own husband passed 2 years back, Samuel was the one who rode 2 counties to see me settled and safe. I don't forget a kindness like that. Clara filed the information away quietly. Another small piece of the man who had, in the span of 1 supper and a handful of days, become the steadiest thing in her collapsing world. By mid-afternoon, a rider arrived from Hawthorne Land, and Clara's heart leapt at the sight of him before she registered that it was not Samuel himself, but a young man in his employ, breathless from hard riding. Message from the captain, ma'am, he said, pressing a folded note into her hands before Rebecca had even finished offering him water. Said it was urgent. Clara unfolded it with trembling fingers. Your aunt discovered you missing this morning. She has told the county you were taken ill and gone to stay with distant cousins for your health. Do not believe this is concern for you. I suspect she means to explain your absence before anyone asks harder questions. Pierce has found more. Stay where you are. I will come myself when it is safe. S.H. What is it? Rebecca asked, watching Clara's face. She's lying about where I've gone, Clara said slowly. Telling people I'm ill visiting cousins. She's protecting her own story, not worrying for me. Of course she is, Rebecca said grimly. A woman who'd forge a will and poison her own kin isn't like to grow a conscience over a missing niece. Clara looked up sharply. How do you know about the will? About the poison? Rebecca's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Samuel's note this morning was rather longer than the one you just received. I told you, Miss Bennet. I don't ask questions, I don't need to. But I do listen when a man I trust tells me the truth of a dangerous situation, so I know how carefully to guard my own door." Clara felt a rush of gratitude so sudden it nearly brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you for trusting him, for trusting me, a stranger." "Don't thank me yet," Rebecca said. "This isn't finished. A woman capable of what you've described won't simply let you slip away quietly. You do well to remember that and stay close to this house until Samuel says otherwise." Sure. 3 days passed in tense, watchful quiet. Clara helped Rebecca with small tasks around the house, mending, kneading bread, tending the modest garden, grateful for anything that kept her hands busy and her mind from circling endlessly back to her aunt's voice through that study window. Other means of ensuring her cooperation. The words followed her through every waking hour. On the 4th day, Samuel arrived himself, dust-covered from hard riding, his face drawn tight with news he clearly did not relish delivering. "Pierce found the apothecary," he said before Clara had even finished greeting him. "The one who sold your aunt the arsenic. He's willing to testify provided he's granted immunity from any charge of knowingly selling to a murderer. Says he had no notion what she intended, only that she paid well and asked no questions be recorded in his usual ledger, which itself is suspicious enough." "That's good news," Clara said, carefully reading past his words to the tension still evident in his shoulders. "Isn't it?" "It is," Samuel agreed. "But there's more. Edward Grayson came to see Pierce." Clara's stomach dropped. "What?" "Showed up at his office in Richmond 2 days past, asking questions about estate law, about what happens to a forged will once discovered, about whether a man who married into a fraudulent inheritance, unknowingly, could be held responsible for it." Samuel's jaw tightened. Pierce played the fool, gave him nothing useful. "But it tells us Edward's starting to understand the ground he's standing on isn't as solid as your aunt promised him." "He's frightened," Clara said slowly. "He's realizing he's been used as much as I have." "Maybe," Samuel said. "Or maybe he's simply calculating how to save his own skin before the whole thing collapses. A man drowning in debt doesn't always choose honor over self-preservation, Clara. I'd not count on his conscience to save you." Clara absorbed that, turning it over. "Then perhaps I ought to speak with him." Samuel's head came up sharply. "Absolutely not. Samuel, it's not safe. If your aunt learns you've surfaced even for a single conversation, she'll move against you faster than we can prepare for. We need more time. Pierce needs more time to build an airtight case. And how much time do we have?" Clara demanded, some of the fear and frustration of the last week finally breaking through her careful composure. "My birthday is 5 weeks away. Once I'm 25, the trust in my father's will transfers to me directly, which means my aunt loses whatever legal claim she still holds over the estate the moment that day arrives. Do you truly believe she intends to sit quietly and let that happen?" Samuel's silence was answer enough. "She will act before then," Clara said. "She told Edward as much herself through that window. She has some plan already in motion, something beyond simply marrying me off." "I felt it in her voice, Samuel. And we are sitting here 3 days' ride from the danger-gathering evidence at a pace that may not outrun whatever she intends." "So what would you have us do?" Samuel asked, his voice rougher now, some of his careful control fraying at the edges. "Walk you back into that house, hand yourself over to a woman who may well have already poisoned 2 people to get what she wanted." "No," Clara said. "I would have us move faster. Bring what evidence we have before Magistrate Coleman, now incomplete as it is, and force the matter into the open before she has the chance to finish whatever she's planning." "Coleman's in her pocket, Clara. You said so yourself." "Then we go over his head," Clara said. "To the circuit judge. To someone with no debt to my aunt's late husband, no reason to protect her." Samuel studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Frustration giving way slowly to something like respect. "You've thought about this." "I've thought of little else," Clara admitted. "I did not run from that house to hide forever, Samuel. I ran to survive long enough to fight properly." "Don't. That evening, a second rider came, this one from Rebecca's nearest neighbor, breathless with news that made Clara's blood run cold before he even finished speaking. "There's men asking after a young woman matching your description," he told Rebecca, glancing nervously at Clara. "2 counties west near the Crossroads Inn, saying she's gone missing, feared taken by force, offering money for word of her whereabouts." "Taken by force," Clara repeated, her voice faint. "She's telling people I was abducted." "Building her story," Samuel said grimly. "If she can convince the county you were taken against your will, then when you're finally found, wherever she intends that to happen, she'll have already shaped the narrative in her favor. You'll be the victim needing rescue, and whoever's with you, however innocent, will look like your captor." Clara felt the trap closing around her, elegant and merciless. "She means to have you arrested. For taking me." "Likely," Samuel agreed. "Or worse. A man accused of abducting an unmarried woman in this county could face considerably graver consequences than arrest if the wrong people decided to take justice into their own hands before any trial." "Then you must leave," Clara said immediately. "Fear for him overtaking every other fear. Now tonight, before anyone connects you to this house. I'm not leaving you undefended. You'll do neither of us any good hanging from a tree before we've proven a single word of this," Clara said, her voice sharper than she intended, though the fear beneath it was entirely genuine. "Please, Samuel, go to Pierce. Bring what we have before a judge who owes my aunt nothing. I will stay here safe until you send word." Samuel's hands closed into fists at his sides, some fierce and helpless anger working behind his eyes. "I don't like leaving you." "I know," Clara said, softer now. "But I would rather you alive and fighting for me from Richmond than hanging from a rope 2 counties away, because you tried to protect me in person." He reached out then and took her hand in both of his, a gesture entirely improper, entirely unplanned, and Clara did not pull away. "I'll come back," he said. "However this ends, Clara Bennett, I intend to come back for you. I'm holding you to that, Captain." He left before dawn, riding hard toward Richmond, and Clara stood at Rebecca's window, watching the dark shape of him disappear into the gray morning light, feeling more alone than she had felt since the night she first knelt before her father's locked chest. 2 days after Samuel's departure, Clara's fragile safety shattered entirely. She was in the garden with Rebecca, gathering the last of the season's beans, when the sound of carriage wheels on the road sent both women's heads up sharply. Rebecca's face went tight and watchful. "Inside," she said quietly. "Now." But it was too late. The carriage was already turning up the drive, and through the window, as Clara pressed herself against the wall inside, she recognized the fine black lacquer of it, the gold trim along the door. Her aunt's carriage. "How?" Clara breathed. "How did she find me?" Rebecca's face had gone pale. "I don't know. I've told no one, spoken to no one." The knock came firm and unhurried, and Rebecca squared her shoulders and went to answer it, leaving Clara frozen in the hallway, her heart slamming against her ribs. "Mrs. Whitmore." Beatrice's voice, smooth and cold, carried clearly into the house. "How lovely to finally make your acquaintance. I understand you've been keeping my niece rather comfortable these past days." Clara's stomach dropped through the floor. "I'm afraid I don't know what you mean," Rebecca said, her voice admirably steady. "Don't insult either of us with denial," Beatrice said. "I have my ways of learning things, Mrs. Whitmore. A servant at the Crossroads Inn who remembers a fine gentleman's carriage turning down this very road some nights past. A stable boy who recalls a young lady matching my niece's description arriving in the dead of night. It was not so very difficult to trace." A pause, and Clara could hear the smile in her aunt's next words. "Clara, I know you're in there. Do come out, darling. You've had your little adventure. It's time to come home." For one endless moment, Clara stood frozen, every instinct screaming at her to stay hidden, to flee out the back, to do anything but face the woman who had quite possibly murdered both her parents. But then she thought of the will hidden in her traveling bag, the letters, the evidence Samuel had written 2 days to bring before a judge. She thought of Martha's courage breaking 7 years of silence. She thought of Samuel's steady voice promising he would come back for her. She would not hide forever. Clara walked to the door and stepped into view. Her aunt's smile did not waver, though something cold flickered behind her eyes at the sight of Clara standing tall, unafraid, meeting her gaze without flinching. "There you are," Beatrice said pleasantly. "You've had us all worried sick, Clara. Running off in the night like some hysterical girl. Whatever possessed you?" "You know precisely what possessed me, Aunt." Beatrice's smile thinned just slightly. "I'm sure I don't." "I found the will," Clara said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "My father's true will in Mother's old writing desk. I know he left everything to me, Aunt Beatrice. I know the document you presented to the court 7 years ago was a forgery. I have the clerk's own sworn statement confirming he altered it at your instruction." For the first time since Clara had known her, something in Beatrice's composure cracked a flicker of genuine alarm crossing her features before she smoothed it away. But Clara had seen it, had seen the fear beneath the ice. "You've been listening to servants' gossip," Beatrice said, but her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "Martha, I imagine. That woman has always had more loyalty to your mother's memory than sense." "I've also seen the apothecary ledger," Clara continued, pressing forward, despite the tremor now working through her hands. "Arsenic purchased under your name 8 years past, and a letter in my mother's own hand written weeks before her death, saying she feared you meant to harm my father, and that she felt herself growing ill in the same manner." Beatrice went very still. "That is a serious accusation, Clara," she said quietly, all pretense of warmth gone now. "One I would advise you to reconsider making unless you wish to be thought entirely unstable. A grieving girl driven to hysteria by imagination and the poisonous gossip of an old servant that is not a story that will serve you well before any court." "It is not imagination," Clara said. "It is evidence. And I intend to see it brought before a judge, Aunt, whether you approve of the timing or not." Beatrice's eyes narrowed to thin, dangerous slits. "You would destroy this family's name over the ravings of a dying woman and the resentment of a servant." "I would see justice done for my parents," Clara said. "If that destroys your name in the process, Aunt, I find I care very little." The silence that followed stretched long and taught Rebecca, standing frozen by the door, clearly uncertain whether to intervene. "You will come home with me," Beatrice said finally, her voice gone flat and hard. "Now, tonight, whatever fantasy you've constructed with that man's help, it ends here." "I will not. You are not yet 25, Clara. You remain by law under my guardianship until that day arrives, and I have every legal right to compel your return." Clara's blood ran cold because her aunt was infuriatingly correct. Whatever evidence they had gathered, whatever truth Clara now carried close to her heart, the law had not yet caught up to it. On paper, Beatrice Holloway still held every right to drag her back. "You would truly force me," Clara said slowly, "knowing what I know. I would remind you," Beatrice said, "that a woman who disappears twice in the same month under suspicious circumstances with a man, not her husband, is a woman whose reputation and sanity any court would question rather severely. Come home quietly, Clara, and perhaps we can still salvage something of your prospects. Continue this defiance, and I promise you I have far more resources at my disposal than you can imagine to see you declared unfit to manage your own affairs entirely." The threat landed exactly as Beatrice intended, cold and precise. And for one terrible moment, Clara felt the ground shifting beneath her again, the trap reasserting itself, even here, even now, 3 counties from home. "She's not going anywhere with you," Rebecca said suddenly, stepping forward, her voice hard as flint. "Not without Captain Hawthorne present, and not without a proper legal order compelling it. You may have influence in your own county, Mrs. Holloway, but you hold none here." Beatrice's gaze swung to Rebecca, cold and assessing. "And who precisely are you to interfere in a family matter?" "A woman who's watched enough cruelty in her life to recognize it dressed up in fine silk," Rebecca said. "You'll leave my property now, or I'll have my nearest neighbor's sons escort you off it themselves." For a long moment, Beatrice looked between the 2 women calculating, and Clara watched her aunt's mind working behind her eyes, weighing the cost of forcing the matter here in a stranger's home against the cost of retreating and regrouping. "Very well," Beatrice said, finally, her voice deceptively mild. "I shall return home for now. But mark me, Clara. I will not simply wait for you to finish playing at Rebellion. You have 5 weeks until your birthday. I promise you this will be settled well before then, one way or another." She turned and swept back toward her carriage without another word, and Clara stood trembling in the doorway, watching the black lacquer vanish down the drive, feeling the full weight of the threat settle over her like a shroud. "She knows where I am now," Clara said quietly. "She knows everything." "Then we've no time to lose," Rebecca said grimly. "I'll send word to Samuel myself tonight. You can't stay here any longer, Miss Bennet. It isn't safe." Yem. Samuel returned within 2 days of Rebecca's urgent message, his face gray with exhaustion and fury when Clara recounted her aunt's visit. "She threatened to have you declared unfit," he repeated, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Christ almighty, Clara, she's willing to have you locked away in an asylum to keep what she's stolen." "I believe she is entirely capable of it," Clara said. "And worse if it comes to that." "Pierce has secured a hearing," Samuel said. "Before Judge Ambrose Whitley, circuit judge out of the capital, no connection to your aunt or her late husband that Pierce could find. It's set for 8 days from now." "8 days," Clara breathed. "Is that enough time?" "It will have to be," Samuel said. "Pierce believes what we have is strong. The will, the clerk's statement, the apothecary ledger, your mother's letter. But he warns it may not be enough to prove murder outright, not without more direct evidence. Forgery and fraud, certainly. Those alone could see her estate seized and returned to you. But the poisoning—" He hesitated. "What is it?" "Pierce believes we need a more direct link. Someone who witnessed something. Some physical evidence beyond the ledger which a clever lawyer could still argue away as unrelated to the deaths." Clara sat with that a long moment, her mind racing back through 7 years of memory, searching for anything, any fragment she might have overlooked as a girl too young and too grieving to see clearly. "The doctor," she said suddenly. "Dr. Alcott. He attended my father in his final illness. He signed the death certificate, listed the cause as natural failure of the heart. But I remember him arguing with my aunt the week before father died. I was young. I didn't understand what I overheard. But I remember his voice angry, saying something about symptoms that didn't match what she claimed." Samuel straightened. "Is he still practicing?" "I don't know. I haven't thought of him in years." "Pierce can find out," Samuel said. "If he's alive, if he's willing to speak honestly about what he observed, rather than what he was pressured to certify, he may hold the key to all of it," Clara finished. Pierce located Dr. Josiah Alcott within 3 days, retired now and living quietly outside Richmond, and Samuel rode to meet him personally. Clara waiting in an agony of hope and dread at Rebecca's house for word of what he learned. When Samuel returned, his expression was carefully guarded in a way that told Clara he was bracing her for difficult news. "He remembers," Samuel said. "Remembers it very clearly, in fact. Said it's weighed on him for 7 years, the compromise he made." "What compromise?" "Your father's symptoms in his final weeks. The vomiting, the weakness, the particular pallor of his skin. Alcott suspected poisoning almost immediately. Arsenic specifically. He'd seen it before in a case some years earlier. But your aunt came to him privately before he filed his report. Offered him a considerable sum to list the cause as natural failure of the heart instead." Clara's hands had gone cold. "And he took it." "He took it," Samuel confirmed, his voice heavy. "Said he told himself at the time it changed nothing, that your father was likely to die regardless, that stirring up a murder investigation would only bring more grief to a grieving family. He's carried the guilt of that decision every day since." "Will he testify?" "He says he will," Samuel said. "Says he owes it to your father's memory, whatever the cost to his own reputation now." Clara felt tears rising hot and sudden, and did not try to stop them. 7 years of grief, of confusion, of quietly accepted lies, And now finally, the pieces were assembling into something whole, something that might at last be strong enough to bring her aunt to justice. "Then we have everything," she said. "The will, the ledger, the clerk, the doctor, my mother's letter. Surely that is enough." "It's more than enough to convict her of fraud and forgery," Samuel said. "Pierce believes with the doctor's testimony added to the rest, we've a strong case for murder as well. But Clara—" He hesitated, and something in his tone made her go still with new fear. "What is it?" "Alcott mentioned something else. Said your aunt visited him again more recently, within the last month." Clara's blood ran cold. "Why?" He wasn't certain. Said she asked strange questions about symptoms of nervous collapse, about how a physician might certify a woman as unfit for her own affairs, prone to delusion and hysteria. Samuel's jaw was tight with barely restrained fury. "Clara, I believe she's been preparing this for weeks, long before you ever found that chest. I believe she always intended to have you declared unstable the moment you became inconvenient to her plans." The realization struck Clara like a physical blow, that her aunt's cruelty was not merely reactive, not simply the panic of a woman caught in her own lies, but a plan laid carefully in advance, a trap constructed and waiting long before Clara had ever thought to question the life she'd been given. "She always meant to destroy me," Clara said quietly. "One way or another. Whether I married Edward quietly or fought back, she had already decided how this would end for me." "Not if we reach the judge first," Samuel said fiercely. "Not if Pierce presents this evidence before she can move against you. Clara, look at me." He took her hands, his grip firm and warm and grounding. 8 days. We have 8 days and everything we need to see her exposed for what she is. I will not let her win this. Clara looked up into his face, into the steady, unwavering resolve there, and felt something in her chest that had been braced tight against despair for 7 long years, finally begin cautiously to unclench. "Neither will I," she said. But Beatrice Holloway had not survived 7 years of careful deception by underestimating her enemies, and 2 days before the hearing, word reached Rebecca's house that turned Clara's fragile hope to ash. A magistrate's order had been filed not by Judge Whitley, but by Magistrate Coleman himself. Beatrice's old ally citing concern for Clara's mental stability and demanding she be examined by a physician of the court's choosing before any hearing could proceed. "She's trying to have me declared unfit before I ever reach the courtroom," Clara said, reading the order with shaking hands. "If a physician certifies me unstable, nothing I say will carry any weight. The will, the letters, none of it will matter if the court believes I'm too deranged to be trusted." "Whitley's hearing still stands," Samuel said, though his voice carried little comfort. "But Coleman's order complicates everything. If we refuse the examination, it looks like we've something to hide. If we comply, and the physician's in her pocket, then I'll be declared mad," Clara finished, "and locked away before I ever speak a word of truth in that courtroom." The trap so carefully laid had finally closed around her, and for the first time since she had knelt before that locked chest in her father's cellar. Clara felt something close to true despair settle over her. Cold and absolute, as the 8 days she had believed would bring her justice began. Instead, terrifyingly, to feel like they might bring her ruin. Pierce arrived at Rebecca's house within hours of the order reaching them. His face grim, a leather satchel of documents clutched under one arm, as though he feared letting it out of his sight, even for a moment. "I've seen orders like this before," he said, laying the paper flat on Rebecca's kitchen table. "Coleman's counting on you refusing the examination outright. Makes you look guilty hysterical exactly as your aunt wants the court to see you. And if I comply—" Clara asked, her voice tighter than she wanted it to be. "Then everything depends on which physician conducts it," Pierce said. "Coleman's order doesn't specify a name yet, which means there's still a window to influence who's chosen." "You mean bribe someone," Samuel said flatly. "I mean," Pierce said with the patient weariness of a man who had spent his career navigating exactly this kind of ugliness, "that Judge Whitley has authority to appoint the examining physician himself, provided we petition him directly and swiftly, before Coleman's order can be executed through his own preferred channels." Clara felt a small, cautious flicker of hope. Can you reach Whitley before Coleman does? I can try, Pierce said. But Clara. He used her given name for the first time, and something in his careful, formal manner cracked just slightly with genuine concern. You must understand the danger here. If Coleman's men arrive at this house before I return with Whitley's counter-order, they have legal grounds to take you into custody for examination immediately. There will be nothing Samuel or I can do to stop it without breaking the law ourselves. Then go, Clara said. Now, every hour matters. Pierce left within the quarter hour, riding hard toward the Capitol, and Clara stood at Rebecca's window, watching him go, feeling the walls of the trap drawing tighter around her with every passing minute. They did not have to wait long. By the following afternoon, a carriage bearing the county seal rolled up Rebecca's drive, and Clara's stomach dropped at the sight of it. Not her aunt's black lacquer this time, but an official conveyance, and stepping down from it, a man in a physician's dark coat, accompanied by 2 officers of the county. Miss Clara Bennett, the physician said, consulting a paper in his hand with the bored efficiency of a man who had done this precise thing many times before. I am Dr. Winslow Marsh, appointed by Magistrate Coleman to conduct an examination pursuant to concerns raised regarding your mental stability. I must ask you to accompany these officers too. On whose authority? Samuel demanded, stepping forward before Marsh could finish, his voice carrying a hard edge Clara had not heard from him before. Marsh's eyes flicked to him, unimpressed. Magistrate Coleman's authority, sir, which is entirely sufficient for these purposes. Magistrate Coleman has no jurisdiction here, Rebecca cut in sharply. This matter's already before Judge Whitley's circuit court. I have received no notice of any such supersession, Marsh said, unmoved. Until I do, my orders stand. Miss Bennett, if you would. She's not going anywhere, Samuel said, positioning himself between Clara and the officers with a stillness that carried more threat than any raised fist could have. Not until word comes from Judge Whitley. One of the officers, a heavy-set man with tired eyes, shifted uncomfortably. Captain Hawthorne, didn't expect to find you mixed up in this business. Samuel's gaze sharpened. Tobias Reed, you served under Colonel Ashford, same as I did. Aye, sir. Something passed across Reed's face. Recognition, respect, the particular loyalty men carried for officers who had led them through hard years. Didn't know this was your affair. It is, Samuel said. And I'll tell you plainly, Tobias, this woman's being persecuted by an aunt who forged a will and likely poisoned her own sister to steal an inheritance. There's a hearing before Judge Whitley 8 days hence that'll prove it. This examination Coleman's ordered is meant to silence her before that truth ever reaches a courtroom. Reed's jaw tightened, clearly torn between duty and the plain, uncomfortable weight of what Samuel had just told him. That may be, Captain, Marsh interjected coldly, but my orders come from a sitting magistrate, and until a superior court intervenes, I am obligated to carry them out. Officers, if the captain will not step aside willingly... Wait. The voice came from the road, urgent and breathless, and every head turned to see a rider coming hard up the drive, Pierce, his horse lathered with sweat, a sealed document clutched triumphantly in one hand. Judge Whitley's counter-order, Pierce called out, swinging down from his horse before it had fully stopped. Dr. Marsh, you are hereby relieved of this examination. Judge Whitley has assumed direct jurisdiction over all matters pertaining to Miss Bennett's competency, pending the hearing already scheduled before his court. Marsh took the document with visible irritation, scanning it quickly, his mouth thinning as he confirmed its authenticity. This changes things, he admitted grudgingly. It does, Pierce agreed. You may return to Magistrate Coleman and inform him his order has been superseded, and you may inform him also, Pierce added, his voice hardening, that Judge Whitley takes a rather dim view of magistrates, attempting to circumvent his authority in cases already before his court. Marsh's face colored, but he said nothing further, only turned and climbed back into the carriage, the officers following with visibly less enthusiasm than they'd arrived with. Reed lingered a moment longer, meeting Samuel's eyes. Good luck to you, Captain, he said quietly. And to the young lady. He tipped his hat to Clara before mounting up, and Clara felt for the first time in what seemed like days something like the ground steadying beneath her feet. "That was too close," Samuel said once the carriage had disappeared down the road, his voice rough with the aftermath of tension he'd kept carefully controlled until now. "But it worked," Clara said, though her hands were shaking badly enough that she had to press them together to still them. "Pierce, thank you. I don't know how to—" "Save your thanks for after the hearing," Pierce said, though not unkindly. "Coleman won't sit quietly after this humiliation. Your aunt has powerful friends, Miss Bennet, and we've just made an enemy of one of them directly. I'd not put it past Coleman to find some other avenue to delay or discredit us before Whitley's court convenes." "Then we prepare for it," Clara said. "Whatever comes next." What came next arrived 3 days before the hearing, in the form of a summons Clara had not anticipated, not from Coleman, not from her aunt, but from Edward Grayson himself, requesting a private audience through Pierce's office, insisting it concerned matters of grave importance to her case. "It could be a trap," Samuel said immediately, pacing Rebecca's small parlor with barely contained agitation. "Beatrice sending him to draw you out, to discredit you further, to plant some new complication before the hearing." "Or," Pierce said carefully, "it could be a man who's realized the ground beneath him has shifted and is looking for some way to save himself before the whole structure collapses." "You believe that?" Clara asked. "I believe," Pierce said, "that Edward Grayson visited my office once, already asking careful questions about his own liability in a fraudulent marriage. A man doing that is a man calculating his exit, not planning further deception." Clara sat with the decision a long moment, weighing the risk against the possibility, however small, that Edward might offer something useful, some piece of the puzzle that could tip the scales decisively in her favor. "I'll see him," she said finally. "But not alone, and not without protection nearby." They arranged the meeting in Pierce's own office in Richmond, a neutral space with Samuel waiting in the adjoining room door, left deliberately ajar. Edward arrived looking nothing like the confident, self-satisfied man who had humiliated her at that dinner table weeks before. His clothes were rumpled, his eyes shadowed, and when he spoke, his voice carried none of its former arrogance. "Miss Bennet, thank you for agreeing to see me. You said this concerned my case, Mr. Grayson. I'm listening." Edward glanced toward the door, toward the shadow of Samuel, visible just beyond it, and something like resignation crossed his face. "I've made a considerable mistake," he said. "Several, in fact. I want you to understand, I did not know when your aunt first proposed this arrangement between us the full extent of what she'd done. I believed foolishly that she was simply eager to see you well settled, and that my own financial difficulties made me a convenient match she was willing to overlook. And now I understand I was never meant to be your husband so much as your jailer," Edward said quietly. "A man desperate enough for money to ask no inconvenient questions about where your inheritance had gone, or why a woman with your father's landholdings was somehow penniless." Clara studied him, searching for the manipulation she half expected to find, and found instead something that looked uncomfortably like genuine shame. "Why tell me this now?" "Because Pierce's questions frightened me," Edward admitted. "Because I've since learned things about your aunt. I wish I hadn't. The doctor. She visited the physician she tried to have appointed for your examination. I am many things, Miss Bennet, weak and greedy chief among them, but I am not a murderer, and I do not intend to hang alongside a woman for crimes I never committed, simply because I was fool enough to court her fortune through you." "What are you offering, Mr. Grayson?" Edward reached into his coat and withdrew a folded paper, sliding it across Pierce's desk toward her. "A written statement. Everything your aunt told me, every instruction she gave regarding our marriage, including her explicit intention to have the ceremony performed before your birthday specifically to prevent the trust from transferring into your control. I've signed it. I'll testify to it before Judge Whitley if it will help see justice done." Clara stared at the document, then at Edward's face, searching for the trap she still half expected. "Why would you sacrifice yourself this way? This statement could see you charged as an accomplice." "Perhaps," Edward said. But Pierce assures me cooperation now before the hearing carries far less risk than being caught complicit after the fact. And frankly, Miss Bennet—" His voice dropped, something almost like genuine remorse threading through it. "I find I have very little appetite left for defending a woman who is quite possibly prepared to have you declared insane and locked away rather than see her crimes exposed. Whatever else I am, I did not sign on for that." Clara picked up the statement with careful hands and read it through, twice her heart quickening with each line. Details of Beatrice's instructions, her insistence on the wedding date, even a mention of a conversation in which Beatrice had discussed chillingly casually what might be done if Clara proved difficult to manage once married. "This is exactly what we need," she breathed. "Edward, this could be the piece that ties everything together." "Then use it," Edward said. "And Miss Bennet, for what small comfort it offers. I am sorry for the words I said at that supper. They were cruel, and they were not even true. I said them because your aunt asked me to, believing it would make you more compliant, more grateful for whatever attention I offered afterward. It was a calculated cruelty, not an honest one, which I suppose makes it worse rather than better." Clara looked at him a long moment, feeling the old wound of that public humiliation shift slightly under the weight of this new understanding, not healed, not forgiven exactly, but recontextualized into something she could finally set down. "Thank you for telling me the truth, Mr. Grayson, even this late. It's the least I owe you," Edward said, rising to leave. "I hope whatever comes of the hearing you find the life you deserve, Miss Bennet. I suspect it looks a great deal more like Captain Hawthorne's steady devotion than anything I ever had to offer." He left without waiting for a response, and Clara sat holding his signed statement, feeling something complicated and unresolved settle in her chest. Not quite forgiveness, but perhaps the beginning of understanding how thoroughly her aunt had used everyone around her as instruments toward a single monstrous purpose. Samuel emerged from the adjoining room the moment the door closed behind Edward. His expression carefully neutral, though Clara could see the tension still coiled in his shoulders. "You heard all of it?" "Every word," Samuel confirmed. "Pierce is right. This changes everything. With Edward's statement added to what we already have, there's no reasonable doubt left for any judge to entertain." "Then we're ready," Clara said, though the words felt fragile even as she spoke them, as though saying them aloud might tempt fate to find some new obstacle to place before them. Pierce, returning from wherever he'd tactfully absented himself during the conversation, gathered the statement carefully into his satchel, alongside the rest of the evidence. 3 days, he said. "I'll spend them preparing our presentation to Judge Whitley meticulously. Every document, every witness, every piece must be beyond reproach. Your aunt will have her own counsel by now, and I promise you whoever she's retained will look for any crack in our case to exploit." "What kind of crack?" Clara asked. "Timing mostly," Pierce said. "The convenience of it all, a niece who happens to discover a forged will and a murder plot precisely when her inheritance is about to transfer, precisely when she's being pressed into an unwanted marriage. A clever attorney will try to paint this as fabrication opportunism, a desperate girl inventing a conspiracy to escape a match she simply didn't want. But we have the clerk's confession, the doctor's testimony, Edward's statement." "We have a great deal," Pierce agreed. "But your aunt has spent 7 years cultivating the appearance of respectability in this county. That counts for something in any courtroom, however unjust it may seem. We must be prepared for her counsel to attack not the evidence itself, but your credibility, your composure, your very sanity, precisely as Coleman's examination order already attempted." Clara felt a fresh wave of dread at the thought, but beneath it, something harder and steadier had begun to form over the past weeks. The same resolve that had carried her up from her chair at that humiliating dinner, that had knelt her before a locked chest, that had walked her through a stranger's door in the dead of night. "Then I will simply have to be more composed, more credible, and more sane than anything she can accuse me of not being," Clara said. "I did not survive 7 years under that woman's roof by being weak, Mr. Pierce. I do not intend to falter now, 3 days from finally seeing her exposed." Pierce studied her a moment, something like genuine admiration crossing his careful professional features. I begin to understand, Miss Bennet, why the captain here rode 2 counties in a single night to see you safely delivered." Samuel said nothing, but Clara caught the faint color rising along his jaw, and despite everything, despite the fear still coiled tight in her stomach, she felt the ghost of a smile tug at her own mouth. The morning of the hearing arrived gray and still, and Clara dressed with careful, deliberate calm, Rebecca helping to fasten the buttons of a modest but dignified gown, her hands steady despite the tremor Clara could feel in her own. "You look every inch your mother's daughter," Rebecca said quietly, studying her in the small mirror. "Strong, unbowed." "I don't feel strong," Clara admitted. "Strength isn't the absence of fear, child. It's walking forward despite it. I've watched you do exactly that every day since you arrived on my doorstep in the dead of night." Samuel waited for her outside, dressed in his finest coat, his face composed into the same steady calm she had come to rely on so completely over these past weeks. He offered his arm as she descended the steps, and she took it, grateful beyond words for the solid, unwavering presence of him. "Whatever happens today," he said quietly as they climbed into the carriage, "you did not do this alone, Clara. Remember that whatever Beatrice's counsel tries to make of it." "I know," Clara said. "I could not have done any of it alone." The Richmond courthouse stood tall and imposing, and Clara's heart hammered as they climbed its steps, passing beneath its columns into the cool, echoing interior where Judge Whitley's courtroom waited. Her aunt was already seated when they entered, composed and elegant in dark silk. Her counsel, a sharp-eyed man Clara did not recognize, bent close beside her in quiet conference. Beatrice's eyes found Clara's across the room, and for one long moment, the two women simply looked at each other. 7 years of carefully constructed lies hanging silent and heavy between them. Then Beatrice smiled small and cold, and looked away. Judge Whitley entered a few minutes later, a lean, gray-haired man with sharp, assessing eyes that missed nothing as he settled behind his bench and called the proceedings to order. "This hearing," he said, his voice carrying easily through the packed courtroom, "concerns the estate of the late Thomas Bennet and allegations of fraud, forgery, and pending sufficient evidence more serious charges against Mrs. Beatrice Holloway. Mr. Pierce, you may proceed." Pierce rose calm and methodical and began laying out the case piece by careful piece. The discovery of the true will, the testimony of the dismissed county clerk regarding the forged filing, the apothecary ledger recording Beatrice's purchase of arsenic in quantities far beyond legitimate household use. Beatrice's counsel objected repeatedly, seeking to exclude evidence to cast doubt on witnesses, but Judge Whitley overruled him time and again with the brisk efficiency of a man who had already reviewed the documents thoroughly and found them compelling. Then Dr. Alcott took the stand. He was an old man now, his hands trembling slightly as he settled into the witness chair, but his voice when he spoke carried the weight of 7 years' buried guilt finally set free. "I told myself for 7 years it changed nothing," he said, his eyes not on Beatrice but on some middle distance, as though speaking more to his own conscience than to the courtroom. "That Thomas Bennet was dying regardless, that filing an honest report would only bring scandal to a grieving family. I was wrong to believe that. I was wrong to accept payment for my silence. Mrs. Holloway came to me 2 days before his death and offered me $200 to certify the cause as natural failure of the heart, rather than the poisoning I strongly suspected from his symptoms." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Beatrice's face had gone rigid, though she said nothing. Her eyes fixed forward with the terrible, brittle composure of a woman watching her carefully constructed world begin finally to crumble. "And what," Pierce asked, "led you to suspect poisoning specifically, doctor?" "The symptoms were consistent with arsenic, the vomiting, the particular pallor, the weakness that came in waves rather than steady decline. I had seen it once before, years earlier in another case. I recognized the pattern, and I chose to my everlasting shame to ignore what I recognized in exchange for Mrs. Holloway's payment." "And Mrs. Bennet's death some years later, did you attend her as well?" "I did not," Alcott admitted. "Mrs. Holloway engaged a different physician for her sister's final illness, one less familiar, I suspect, with the symptoms that might have raised similar questions. The courtroom had gone utterly silent, every eye fixed on the old doctor as he laid bare 7 years of guilt in halting, honest sentences. When he finished, Beatrice's counsel rose to cross-examine, attempting to shake his testimony, to suggest his memory had grown unreliable with age, that his sudden confession smacked more of a guilty conscience seeking absolution than genuine recollection. But Alcott held firm, and when the clerk's sworn statement was read into evidence next, followed by Edward's own signed account of Beatrice's explicit instructions regarding the forced marriage timeline, Clara watched something visibly break in her aunt's composed, elegant mask. "Mrs. Holloway," Judge Whitley said finally, once the evidence had been fully presented, "you have heard the testimony against you. Do you wish to respond?" Beatrice rose slowly, and for one moment, Clara saw something almost vulnerable flicker across her aunt's face before it hardened again into cold, defiant composure. "This is a conspiracy," Beatrice said, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom, "constructed by a bitter, ungrateful girl and a man seeking to secure her fortune for himself through marriage. Every piece of this so-called evidence can be explained. The will was destroyed accidentally years ago in a fire in my study. I have said as much before, and no one questioned it then. The apothecary purchase was for legitimate household use, as any farm requires. Doctor, Alcott's memory is clearly failing him and Mr. Grayson." Her eyes cut toward the back of the courtroom where Clara now realized Edward himself sat grim and silent. "Mr. Grayson signs whatever statement will save his own skin from the debts he can no longer pay." And the clerk's sworn testimony regarding the forged filing?" Whitley asked, unmoved by her performance. "A disgruntled former employee, dismissed for incompetence, seeking to extract payment through false accusation," Beatrice said smoothly. "I would remind the court that I have managed this family's affairs faithfully for 7 years at considerable personal sacrifice, taking in a niece with no fortune of her own and asking nothing in return but her eventual settled happiness." It was, Clara thought, watching her aunt's performance with something between horror and reluctant admiration. A masterful display of composed, wounded innocence. And for one terrible moment, she feared it might actually work. That 7 years of cultivated respectability might yet outweigh the mounting evidence against her. Then Judge Whitley turned to Clara herself. "Miss Bennet, you have remained silent throughout these proceedings. I believe it is time the court heard directly from you." Clara rose, her legs unsteady beneath her, and walked to stand before the bench, feeling every eye in the courtroom fix upon her, her aunt's cold and calculating, Edward's grim and watchful, Samuel's steady and full of quiet, unwavering faith. "Your Honor," she said, her voice trembling only slightly, "I did not come to this courtroom seeking revenge against my aunt, however much cause I might have to want it. I came seeking only the truth my parents deserved and the justice denied them for 7 years, while I was told week after week that I was a burden to be tolerated rather than a daughter with an inheritance stolen from her." She drew a breath, steadying herself, and continued, "My aunt speaks of sacrifice, of faithful management of this family's affairs. I would ask the court to consider what sacrifice looks like set against the evidence you have heard today. A forged will filed within days of my father's death before any other family member could review his true estate. An apothecary ledger recording arsenic purchased under her own name in quantities no legitimate household use could explain. A physician paid to certify a false cause of death and a second death. My mother's attended by a stranger conveniently unfamiliar with the symptoms that might have raised the same questions. A forced engagement timed with deliberate precision to occur before my 25th birthday, when the true will would have transferred my inheritance directly into my own hands. And finally, when I began to question these things, an attempt to have me declared unfit for my own affairs, examined by a physician chosen specifically to ensure whatever conclusion my aunt required." She looked directly at Beatrice now, 7 years of careful, contained grief, finally breaking free into something clear and unshakable. "This is not the record of a woman who sacrificed faithfully for a grateful niece, Your Honor. This is the record of a woman who murdered her own sister and brother-in-law to steal what belonged to their child, and who was prepared to see that child locked away in an asylum rather than allow the truth to surface." I do not ask this court for vengeance. I ask only that the truth buried for 7 years beneath my aunt's careful lies finally be permitted to stand in the light." The courtroom sat in absolute silence when she finished, and Judge Whitley studied her a long moment, something like quiet respect crossing his weathered features before he turned back toward Beatrice, whose composed mask had at last begun visibly to fracture. "Mrs. Holloway," Whitley said, his voice carrying the weight of a decision already largely made, "in light of the testimony and documentary evidence presented before this court today, I find sufficient cause to refer this matter for full criminal prosecution on charges of forgery fraud and pending further investigation by the county prosecutor, the murder of Thomas and Margaret Bennett. You are remanded into custody pending trial. The estate of Thomas Bennett, including all lands and holdings previously fraudulently transferred, is hereby restored in full to his rightful heir, Miss Clara Bennett, effective immediately." The courtroom erupted into murmurs, and Clara stood frozen at the center of it, scarcely able to comprehend the words, even as they settled over her 7 years of grief and theft and careful lies undone in the space of a single judicial pronouncement. Beatrice's composure shattered entirely, then her carefully cultivated mask, collapsing into something raw and furious as the bailiffs moved to take her into custody. "You ungrateful, wretched girl," she hissed, as they led her past Clara toward the courtroom doors. "Everything I built, everything I arranged, and you would see it all destroyed for a dead man's sentiment. You murdered my parents," Clara said quietly, meeting her aunt's furious gaze without flinching, the words carrying 7 years of buried grief finally spoken aloud. "You stole 7 years of my life, told me daily I was worthless, unlovable, a burden to be endured. Everything you built was built on their graves, Aunt Beatrice. I do not regret seeing it fall." Beatrice said nothing more. Her face twisted with a fury she no longer bothered to conceal. And the bailiffs led her from the courtroom, her elegant composure finally completely gone. Clara stood in the sudden ringing silence that followed, feeling Samuel's hand find hers, steady and warm, and for the first time in 7 long years, she allowed herself to weep openly. Not from grief this time, but from the overwhelming, disorienting relief of truth finally set free, after so long buried in darkness. The courtroom emptied slowly around them, and Clara stood in the hollow quiet that comes after a storm has finally broken, still gripping Samuel's hand, as though letting go might undo everything that had just been won. Pierce approached his usually composed face, touched with something like triumph he did not often permit himself to show. "It's done, Miss Bennett," he said. "Or nearly. The criminal proceedings against your aunt will take months to conclude, but the civil matter, the estate, the inheritance that stands settled as of this morning. Everything your father left you is yours again." "I scarcely believe it," Clara admitted, her voice still unsteady. 7 years and it ends in a single afternoon." "It ends," Pierce corrected gently, "because you spent those 7 years surviving long enough to see this afternoon arrive. Don't mistake speed for ease, Miss Bennett. You earned this." Outside the courthouse, the gray morning had given way to pale, uncertain sunlight, and Clara stood on the steps a long moment breathing air that felt absurdly entirely different than it had only hours before. Edward Grayson lingered near the bottom of the steps, apart from the small crowd that had gathered to watch Beatrice Holloway led away in chains, and when Clara's eyes found him, he inclined his head solemn and quiet. "I don't expect your friendship, Miss Bennett," he said when she approached him. "I don't believe I've earned it, but I hope you'll believe I meant what I said in Pierce's office." "I do believe it," Clara said. "You could have stayed silent, Mr. Grayson. Let the evidence stand or fall without your testimony. You chose otherwise." "A small redemption against a great deal of foolishness," Edward said with a faint rueful smile. "I intend to sell what remains of my estate and start again somewhere my name isn't quite so tangled up with hers. Somewhere west, perhaps. Ohio or further." "I wish you well in it," Clara said, and found somewhat to her own surprise that she meant it. He tipped his hat to her and to Samuel standing close behind, and walked off down the street without another word, a man shedding one life to search however uncertainly for another. "Do you forgive him?" Samuel asked quietly, once Edward had gone. I don't know, Clara admitted. I think I understand him, which is not quite the same thing. He was weak, and my aunt found his weakness useful. That doesn't excuse the cruelty of that night, but it explains it, and I find I have very little room left in my heart for carrying anger toward a man who in the end helped bring the truth to light. That's a more generous accounting than most would give him. Perhaps, Clara said. But I find I'm tired of carrying weight that isn't mine to carry any longer, Samuel. I set down my aunt's lies today. I'd like to set down Edward's cruelty too, if I can manage it. The estate awaited her when she returned her father's land, her mother's house, the tobacco fields stretching gold and green under the summer sun. All of it hers now by law and by right, restored after 7 years of theft. But walking through the front door for the first time as its true and legal mistress, Clara found the homecoming carried as much grief as triumph. Martha met her in the front hall, and the older woman's composure broke entirely at the sight of her tears streaming freely as she pulled Clara into an embrace fierce enough to steal her breath. I heard, Martha said, her voice thick. The whole county's heard by now, child. Beatrice Holloway taken off in chains. I never thought I'd live to see it. I couldn't have done it without you, Martha. Without your courage, 7 years of silence broken, because you finally trusted me to carry the truth. You were always strong enough to carry it, Martha said. I simply waited too long to trust that. Clara walked slowly through the house that afternoon, room by room, seeing it now with entirely new eyes, the parlor where her aunt had held court over so many cruel, careful conversations. The dining room where Edward had humiliated her, the cellar where she had first knelt before a locked chest and felt her old quiet life begin to crack open. Every corner held some echo of the woman she had been forced to become these past weeks, and every corner, too, held some quiet reminder of what she had lost long before she understood she was losing it. She found her mother's rosewood desk still in the attic where they'd left it, and she had it carried down and placed in her own bedroom, a small act of reclamation that felt somehow more significant than the entire courtroom proceeding that had restored her legal claim to everything else. Your mother would be proud, Martha said again, watching her arrange the desk by the window, not simply of the inheritance won back child, of the woman who won it. Samuel did not linger long at the house that first evening, some careful sense of propriety keeping him at a respectful distance now that Clara stood restored to her own household and name. But he returned the following morning, and the morning after that, and within a week Clara found herself watching for the sound of his horse on the drive with an eagerness she made no great effort to disguise. You needn't ride out here every day, Captain, she told him, only half teasing, as they walked together through the garden her aunt had let fall into neglect these past years. I know it, Samuel said. Reckon I want to, though. Reckon you do, Clara echoed, and he glanced at her sideways, something warm and unguarded in his expression that she had rarely seen from him before these past weeks had worn away his careful reserve. There's a matter I've been meaning to raise with you, he said after a moment, his tone shifting towards something more careful. What matter? Pierce mentioned during the settlement proceedings that your father's original will named a guardian for you. Should your aunt prove unfit, a trusted friend and attorney? The document said, though it named no one specifically. Seeing as the position's now vacant, and seeing as you're nearly of age, regardless, it's mostly a formality. But I wondered. He stopped himself, looking oddly uncertain for a man who had only days before stood calm and steady before an entire courtroom. You wondered what, Samuel? I wondered whether you'd allow me to see to matters here properly, he said, until your birthday settles the question entirely. Not as your guardian in any formal sense, you've had quite enough of guardianship forced upon you without your consent. But as your friend, if you'll permit it. Someone to see the estate's affairs run smoothly, the tenant farms managed fairly, until you've had time enough to learn the business of it yourself. Clara studied him a long moment, feeling something warm unfurl slowly in her chest. You've done a great deal for me already, Captain. Ridden through the night face down Coleman's officers testified before a judge on my behalf. I begin to wonder when you intend to stop looking after me and simply let me manage my own affairs. Didn't say I intended you couldn't manage them. Samuel said, a faint smile touching his mouth. Said I'd like the chance to stay close while you learn to, if you'd have me. Clara felt her cheeks warm and did not look away from him. I find I would very much like that, Samuel. The weeks that followed carried a rhythm entirely unlike anything Clara had known in her father's house before mornings spent learning the true scope of her inheritance. Walking the tobacco fields with the estate's foreman, reviewing ledgers Beatrice had kept scrupulously honest on the surface, even as she'd stolen from the depths of them afternoons given over to correspondence with Pierce regarding the ongoing criminal proceedings against her aunt, and increasingly, evenings spent on the porch with Samuel watching the sun set gold over land that finally truly belonged to her. The criminal trial, when it finally convened some 6 weeks later, proved almost anticlimactic after the fierce drama of the civil hearing, the evidence too overwhelming, too thoroughly documented for even Beatrice's expensive counsel to mount much of a defense. Dr. Alcott testified again, his voice steadier this time, his conscience visibly lighter for having spoken the truth once already. The apothecary himself appeared confirming the ledger entries under oath. The dismissed clerk repeated his confession before a jury rather than a single judge, and Beatrice sat through all of it with her composure finally permanently shattered. No longer the elegant, controlled woman who had ruled Clara's life for 7 years, but something smaller and more desperate, aging visibly under the weight of the truth closing in around her. The jury took less than an hour to convict her of forgery and fraud. The murder charges took longer, 3 days of careful deliberation, weighing circumstantial evidence against the absence of any single irrefutable proof, but in the end the pattern proved too damning to ignore the arsenic purchase, the paid physician, the suspiciously convenient timing of both deaths, the desperate scramble to have Clara declared unfit, the moment the truth threatened to surface. Guilty, the foreman announced on all counts, and Clara sat in the gallery beside Samuel and felt something in her chest finally fully release 7 years of grief and confusion and quiet buried rage given permission at last to become something like peace. Beatrice was sentenced to hang for the murders, the judge's voice flat and final as he delivered it, and Clara felt no triumph in the moment, only a kind of exhausted, hollowed-out relief that the long fight was finally truly over. Do you regret it? Samuel asked her quietly as they left the courthouse for the last time. Seeing her sentenced to die for it, Clara considered the question seriously, turning it over as she had turned over so much else these past months. I regret that it came to this at all, she said finally. I regret that my father and mother are dead, that 7 years of my life were stolen by a woman I once trusted enough to call family. But I do not regret the truth being told, Samuel. Whatever comes of it now, at least it is finally entirely true. Life at the Bennett estate settled in the months that followed into something Clara had not known she was capable of building, not simply the restoration of what her aunt had stolen, but something genuinely new shaped by her own hands, rather than inherited wholesale from a past she barely remembered clearly. She reopened the tenant negotiations her aunt had allowed to grow harsh and exploitative, restoring fairer terms that earned her within a season the quiet, grateful loyalty of families who had farmed Bennett land for generations. She had her mother's old sitting room restored, the rosewood desk returned to its rightful place, and spent long evenings there, answering correspondence, managing accounts, learning by careful patient practice the business her father had once managed alone. Samuel remained a constant presence through it all, though he was careful, scrupulously careful, never to overstep the boundaries of propriety, even as the warmth between them deepened week by week. He rode out most mornings to oversee whatever needed overseeing, took his supper with her most evenings, and departed always before full dark, leaving Clara standing on her own porch steps, watching his shape recede down the drive with a longing she was only beginning to fully understand. You could stay longer, she told him once, some months into this quiet, careful courtship, when autumn had begun to color the tobacco fields gold and brown. Could, Samuel agreed. Wouldn't be proper, though, a man staying late at an unmarried woman's house, however honorable his intentions. And are your intentions honorable, Captain? Something flickered across his face. Not quite alarm, but close to it. The particular caution of a man unused to speaking plainly about matters of the heart. Clara, I only ask, she said softer now, because I find myself wondering more often than is perhaps wise what your intentions are. You've given me 7 months of your time, Samuel. Your protection, your counsel, your friendship. I find I want to know whether there's more beneath it or whether I've simply imagined a warmth that isn't truly there. Samuel was quiet a long moment, and Clara felt her heart hammering, wondering if she had, after everything, misjudged this entirely. You haven't imagined it, he said finally, his voice rough. I've simply been careful not to press it. You've had enough forced upon you this past year, Clara. A forced engagement, a forced flight from your home, a forced examination meant to steal your very sanity from you. I didn't want to add my own feelings to that pile of things pressed upon you before you'd had proper time to simply exist as your own woman, free of anyone else's expectations. Clara felt tears rising unexpected and warm. That is, I think, the kindest reason anyone has ever given me for staying silent about loving me. Samuel's breath caught audibly. I didn't say, you didn't have to, Clara said. I've watched you say it in 100 smaller ways these past 7 months, Samuel Hawthorne. I simply wondered when you'd trust me enough to say it plainly. He crossed the porch to stand before her, closer than propriety strictly allowed, and reached up to touch her face with a gentleness that made her breath catch in turn. I love you, he said simply. Have I think since the night you rose from that dinner table with more dignity than the whole room deserved. I didn't say it sooner, because I wanted you to choose it freely once you'd had the chance to be entirely your own woman, first answerable to no one's expectations, but your own. I have had that chance, Clara said. Months of it, and I find, having had it, that what I choose freely is you, Samuel. Not because I need protecting, not any longer, because I want you beside me, whatever comes. He proposed properly a week later, not with elaborate ceremony, but with the same plain, steady sincerity that had first drawn her to him across that crowded dining room. Kneeling in the garden, she had spent months restoring a small ring that had belonged to his own mother, held carefully in his weathered hands. I've little to offer beyond what you already have in greater measure, he said. No great fortune, though, my land's honest and well tended. No fine title, only a captain's rank earned hard in a war I'd rather forget most days. But I'll stand beside you, Clara Bennett, through whatever comes, the way I stood that first night at your aunt's table, and every night since. That, Clara said, her voice thick with tears she made no effort to hide, is worth considerably more than fortune or title, Samuel Hawthorne. Yes, my answer is yes. They married in early spring, a quiet ceremony held in the garden, rather than any grand church attended by Martha, weeping openly through the entire service by Rebecca Whitmore, who had traveled the 2 counties' distance to see the young woman she'd sheltered finally find her happiness by Pierce, solemn and proud in his role as the man whose careful legal work had made this day possible at all. Even Edward Grayson sent a brief letter of congratulation from wherever he had finally settled out west, wishing her joy with what read, Clara thought, like genuine sincerity rather than mere obligation. There was no lavish feast, no grand announcement to the county at large. Clara had had enough these past months of grand announcements and public spectacle to last a lifetime. She wanted only this Samuel's steady hand in hers, Martha's tearful blessing, the quiet, hard-won peace of a home, finally truly her own shared, now with a man who had never once tried to rescue her so much as stood beside her while she rescued herself. In the years that followed, the Bennett estate, Hawthorne now, though, Clara insisted on keeping her father's name attached to it as well. A small act of remembrance she would not surrender, even in marriage, grew into something neither cruelty nor theft could easily unmake again. Samuel proved as steady a partner in marriage as he had been in courtship, never once attempting to claim credit for what Clara had built and fought for entirely on her own terms. Martha remained with them until her own passing some years later, dying peacefully in the same house she had served faithfully for decades, her final years spent surrounded by the family she had helped save rather than the fear she had lived under for so long. Clara often thought in quiet moments of her mother's letter discovered in that rosewood desk in the attic, the fear in every careful word, the desperate hope that someone someday would carry the truth forward when she herself could not. She thought, too, of her father's will, the simple, devoted certainty of a man who had trusted his daughter to be strong enough someday to claim what was rightfully hers. They had not lived to see this day. But Clara carried them with her regardless, in the land she tended, in the tenants she treated fairly, in the daughter she and Samuel raised together to know her own worth, without ever needing a man's approval to claim it. In the quiet, unshakable dignity she had learned at that humiliating dinner table so many years before was worth more than any fortune Edward Grayson or anyone else might have offered her instead. She never forgot the sound of Edward's cruel words that night, nor the sight of her aunt's satisfied smile watching them land. But she remembered far more clearly, and far more often, the sound of a chair scraping back the sight of Samuel Hawthorne crossing that silent room, without a word, the quiet, steady certainty in his voice as he held that door open for her. Wasn't for you, was for the room. She knew now, all these years later, that it had been for her all along the first small act in a long, hard-won journey toward a justice and a love that no lie, however carefully constructed, could ever again take from her. Clara Bennett Hawthorne stood in her garden that final spring, watching her husband teach their young daughter to sit a horse properly, watching Martha's memory linger gentle and warm in every corner of the house she had helped protect. And she understood with the quiet, unshakable certainty that had carried her through every dark night of the past years that dignity once claimed and never surrendered could not be stolen twice. The truth had cost her 7 years of grief and a night of public humiliation before it finally set her free. But free she was entirely and forever, and nothing, not cruelty, not deception, not even death itself would ever again take that freedom from her.